think we got it.
Start.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. Glad to see everybody made it. I'm Corey Skellinger. I work for the Utah Department of Agriculture. I'm the soil health planner for the northern part of the state. So if you have any questions, feel free to hang back for a few minutes. I'm sure Vaughn will be here to talk with you as well as myself. But otherwise, we'll get started. We've got Vaughn Peterson presenting, and I'll just turn it over to him to introduce himself and his topic and all that. Thanks.
And Cameron, I should probably use the mic even if I don't.
Yes, you can take it off and stand and walk around.
Okay. Especially want to walk around a little bit right at first. Maybe once I get to advancing slides and stuff, I'll be behind the pulpit looking at the computer. To introduce myself, my name is Vaughn Peterson. I grew up on a farm in Washington State. And when I was a little boy, we grew sugar beets and potatoes mostly. That's what I remember anyway, was the big beet digger. I used to climb around on that later on when I was not supposed to, but I would do that when I was young, and Grandpa would get mad at me. I lived there until I went to college. I went to college and got a degree in chemical engineering, and worked in engineering for 24 years. And got tired of that after a while. Ultimately, I was really excited about health and the environment. And so I totally changed my career. And now my job is I'm the nutritional health coach at the St. George Natural Grocers store, which is really fun. I get to coach people one-on-one. I get to teach classes like this to our customers. This is a class that's oriented to our customers about organic food. And I get to do these kinds of represent the store at conventions and things. So it's a really fun and interesting job. But I've always been interested in human health. I've always been sensitive to the importance of environmental health. And since I grew up on a farm, as we talk about the well-being of farmers and their economic well-being, that's important to me. And so all those things kind of come together in this topic and in this conference for sure. And so I was excited to get to attend and give a talk about this, a presentation, whatever. Feel free to join in. It's much more fun if all of you are participating where we can. And hopefully this is good for everybody. It was fun for me to find this job with Natural Grocers. I didn't realize that they were so aligned with sustainability, organic food. I knew they were about health because they're kind of a health food store, grocery store / health food store. And I'll tell you a little bit about the store, but their values really aligned with mine on these topics. So I'm going to start moving through the slides a little bit. If I can get this hooked back up. There we go. So this is a little bit of a funny disclaimer. This shows up at the start of every single one of our presentations. Most of our presentations are about alpha-lipoic acid and B vitamins and fish omega-3 oil and stuff, and we have to put this on every one. We're not going to talk much about supplements, but I am required to tell you that this class is not intended to mitigate, diagnose, or treat any disease. And supplements and food can interact with prescription medications. So if you have any of those kinds of concerns, that's something to talk to your doctor about, because I can't help you there. But we're not going to be talking about supplements. So I do want to tell you just a little bit about Natural Grocers. I won't spend a ton of time on it. But it was founded in 1955 by a couple of people named the Isleys. They were interested in health, obviously, and interested in the health of their community. And so the store, which now I don't know how many, there's 150 stores, I think, in the western U.S., western meaning anywhere west of about Oklahoma, and they're opening a lot of new stores all the time. So it's kind of it's not a big chain like Safeway, but it's reasonably large. And they founded the company on these 5 founding principles, and I won't go through all of them. They're all fairly important, but one of them that's really cool, I think, is focusing on nutrition education. That's why every store employs a health coach that does free health coaching with people and gets to go give talks like this, which is kind of unique. We want to educate our customers. and to be out in the public talking about the things that are important to the company and our values. The other one that I wanted to highlight is the highest quality standards in the industry. So that applies to everything that's in the store, whether that's our organic produce, high standards for that, our meat and dairy has very high standards, our supplements all have to be third-party tested, our health and beauty care, there's a bunch of things that we don't allow in all of our products. So we want it so that the customers, they can come in, pick an item off the shelf, and know that it's going to be supportive of their health and even the health of the environment without having to study it and read every ingredient on the label, which we still promote people doing, but they can pretty much count on it not having these bad things if they see it in our store. So, when you think of how most of our food is produced these days, what kind of things do you think of? I'm thinking of like the massive food production that's done. China. You think of China. That's a good first comment. What else? Roundup. Yeah, and glyphosate, everybody's favorite chemical. What else?
You know, I remember the food change back in 1980, you still look started at food apple and food there, and also garbage.
Yeah, so often what you buy at the store doesn't taste like a tomato when you buy a tomato. And there's lots of reasons for that. But it's mass production, right? It's monocultures, it's heavy chemical use, animal feedlots. All those things are taking a toll on our health, on the health of the environment, and even on the economy. And so here are some of the things, there's lots of things up here, of the ways that the food system is harming the environment, human health, and the economy. Now, my question on this slide is it fair to blame all this stuff on the food system? Maybe not entirely, right? There's certainly poor health. There's some good arguments to be made there. And really, you could probably make an argument on each of these things. But it's not entirely the food system, but I think the food system does have an impact on each of these things. And we'll talk about some of these environmental problems. Poor health, if you look at the statistics, it's really scary when it comes to chronic disease and heart disease and stroke and dementia and diabetes, and many of these things are lifestyle and diet related. So that ties to the food system pretty nicely. And even the economy. The economy is complicated, right? But it's been shown that in areas where there are more industrial farms, more concentrated animal feeding operations, the economy is depressed and there's more poverty. And generally the community well-being is lowered. They've done some studies on that. So in some ways, the food system does tie to each of these, even though I don't think it is fair to entirely blame the food system for all of these terrible things. And so this is kind of what we teach. Because we eat in a way, a lot of it does tie to eating. Because we eat in a way that undermines our health, abuses our natural resources, and destroys our economy, those are strong words, destroys the economy, the conventional food system is not sustainable. So that's generally what we believe, and I believe that for the conventional food system. And that's why we're all here, right, is to look into ways that we can be part of improving that food system. So a little bit of history. Artificial fertilizers were first mass-produced around World War I. Chemical pesticides became popular just after World War II in the 40s. And then in the 60s, there was the Green Revolution, which I think was intended on this slide to be a misnomer, like, look, it shouldn't have been a green revolution. But at the time, I think maybe it was. The thought was, we're going to improve agriculture, we're going to have better fertilization, we're going to have better pesticides, and we'll produce more food. But it didn't have all this consequences that I think we expected. Crop varieties change a little bit with dwarf wheat and rice becoming more prominent at that time. And now, most of our farming, according to this, 99% of the U.S. uses synthetic pesticides, fertilizers, herbicides, and fungicides. And so we know that that has some problems that come with it. Yeah.
What is a synthetic fertilizer?
I wish I could answer that well. What do you think?
I don't know.
Well, it's not manure.
I think manure can be bad.
Could be.
Have to be careful with it, very careful with it, because diseases in the food and in the people that eat it.
Pathogens in the manure. Yeah.
Fertilizers, most, a number of the fertilizers we use are not, I don't consider synthetic.
Mm-hmm.
They're natural chemicals that come out of the ground.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think that's fair. And so I don't know, I mean, I don't farm. You guys know so much about those practices more than I do. And I don't know where to draw that line.
See, lime, gypsum, those are natural chemicals that we dig out of the soil, and don't all are used.
And I imagine those, and maybe some of you can answer this question, are usable in organic agriculture. And I imagine some of those are permissible in organic agriculture. Is that true? And so those would not be the ones we're really talking about as harmful. But yeah, they come out of the ground for sure.
In the area where I live, if we didn't have gypsum in the soil, we wouldn't be farming.
Right. And I don't think the intention is to say that all fertilizer that's not manure is bad. Certainly not what we're trying to say. Good questions, though, and I'm glad you bring these kinds of things up, because these are the sorts of things that many people, including myself, don't understand all the specifics about what makes up a synthetic fertilizer versus what doesn't. So,
I didn't hear what you said.
where
Where am I from? Emory County. We have a number of gypsum mines in the area. One of the southern United States, they use a lot of lime to raise the pH. We try to do the opposite.
Yep. So please bring these kinds of things up, because this part of why I'm attending the conference is to learn about all of this, so that when I speak to the customers and when I try to grow my own gardens, that I can understand this a little bit better. So I love the fact that you bring up questions like that. Keep doing it. So in terms of harming the environment, there's damage that's done to the water and to the soil, and a reduction of biodiversity. 22 million tons of fertilizer used a year, and some crops are planted year after year, which requires us to put nutrients back into the soil that the crops they need and they use. There are other things that can be done from a lot of fertilizer application. Who's heard of dead zones that are caused by runoff? A couple people. So the fertilizer is applied in the spring, and then as it rains in the spring and summer, then sometimes it runs off and it ends up in the environment. And so this dead zone is created in the Gulf of Mexico each year. Does anybody know what causes that? Dead zone? What's responsible for it? I see some yes, William.
A lot of the fertilizers that leach out of the soil.
And then what happens down there in the water?
It kills the microbiology, which the higher life forms depend on, so they die secondary.
Yeah, and also what happens is it's algae. So the algae love it. So they get that fertilizer and they're like, yeah, and they really bloom, and And that sucks up a bunch of oxygen, and they release some toxins too, and that helps kill off the marine life. So it happens down the Gulf of Mexico every year. And it's not just there. I guess in 2008, they said there were 405 of those in the world. Not as big as this one probably. And in 2015, so it went from 405 in 2008 to 550 of them in 2015. So there are more and more of those as we use more and more fertilizer. And there's pesticides and herbicides. At first, when I read this statistic, only 1% of applied pesticides reach the pests. I thought, oh, really? No way. But that makes sense, because there's only a few pests, and we have to spray a lot of pesticide to kill them. And so the rest of it ends up in the environment and in stream water and in groundwater. 97% of stream water has these pesticides in it, and 61% of groundwater. And it even gets down through the aquifers. So it's interesting where I grew up. My dad still lives on the farm where I grew up, and he makes comments periodically like, "Wow, there's a lot of dementia here. My mom is suffering from dementia. Is probably gonna pass away from it." But he said there's a lot of people that have dementia here, and I don't know if that's from chemicals. I don't know, and I don't even say it to my dad, but my dad's like, I wonder. Anyway, so the reason I bring that up is because so I worry about the water system. We have a well on the farm, and we just pump our water out of the well, and I don't know. And so it's a concern for sure when the pesticides and herbicides are applied that it gets down into the water. And who knows if it's causing the stuff my dad's observing up there. I don't know. It could be anything. But I worry about that a little bit. So pesticides are kind of hard on the overall ecosystem because they kill the bugs, of course, but some of those bugs are feeding the birds and the bats. It can kill the bees too, which is not necessarily good. And then those toxic residues kind of move up the food chain from the small organisms to the larger ones, and then we can end up eating that as well. And the pests tend to adapt over time, so that we have to use stronger and stronger pesticides and herbicides to keep the bugs and weeds down. And of course, this affects the bees. Who's heard of colony collapse disorder? A few? Yeah, I know it. When I first heard about it, it was in the mid-2000s, I guess. In 2006, there was a time frame, and I don't know if this is just when it started or when it peaked or whatever, but beekeepers lost 30 to 90% of their colonies to colony collapse disorder. 2006? Yeah. And bees are important, obviously. They pollinate 35% of the world's crops, and wild plants depend on them too. So if we were to lose bees, that would be a big problem. And their collapse has been linked to the use of what's called neonicotinoid insecticides, neonicotinoid. And so what we teach our customers then is to help avoid that, we need to be buying organic produce. So that because those neonicotinoids are not allowed on organic produce. And so if we're buying it, if we're growing it, that helps support the health and long-term sustainability of our pollinators. One other interesting little bee part. Who's heard of RNAi technology? So as a technology, I think it's really cool. I haven't researched it deeply, but what it does is it turns off genes in plants. So it's a newer genetic technology. You don't have to go change the plant's genes. You can use these RNAi chemicals that will turn off genes in plants. So we heard about epigenetics and some of the other talks where even our genes can turn off and turn on depending on the environmental signals. Well, we can do that with plants. Maybe you've heard of simplot potatoes. They don't bruise as much. That sounds, technology-wise, that sounds really, really good. And I think if we really get to understand how that works, maybe there's some real potential there. But since we don't understand it quite well enough, there's some indication that this RNAi stuff can actually affect the pollinators and their genes. And so we just maybe don't know enough about what that's doing. So it may be fantastic for the future, but right now, it's still a little bit of a question. So that's something to be, another reason to, again, those aren't allowed in organic produce, so it's another reason to buy it and consume it. Obviously, pesticides damage the soil. If we're at this conference, we're thinking about the health of the soil and the health of the microbes that live in the soil. Healthy soil has a healthy carbon cycle, a balance of minerals and nutrients, and the pesticides tend to kill more than just the pests we're worried about. They damage the microbes down in the soil and make it less healthy. And with synthetic fertilizers, probably not the natural ones you're talking about, but with synthetic fertilizers that are manufactured from petrochemicals, for example, those tend to accumulate some impurities in the soil. Things like arsenic and cadmium and mercury and fluorine and others. And then if we continue to monoculture row crops, we have to add a lot of chemical inputs and plow, and we lose a lot of topsoil. So that's obviously a big topic at the conference as well. And something that we mentioned to our customers, the other presentation I did had more on that. But it's important, as obviously. And this is some of the costs for farmers. Fertilizer costs, obviously, estimated that each year it's $500 million spent by farmers on fertilizer. I loved that statistic that Jimmy Emmons gave about how much less he was spending on fertilizer every year, something like saving $100,000 a year. A low number meaning he's, I think we're spending more than that each year? Oh, yeah, this presentation is probably not up to date on this year. It went from 500 to 1,500? Wow, interesting. If others are online, comment was made that the cost of anhydrous ammonia went up from 500 last year to 1,500 this year. Wow. Uh-huh. Wow. For those who are online, the recommendation was to check out the Ice Age Farmer on YouTube. Okay. Thanks. So yeah, all this fertilizer is costly. Its production creates greenhouse gases. We talked about the dead zones already. And all this is hard on people as well. Do you know that 94% of the U.S. population will test positive for pesticide breakdown products in their urine? Now, I'd like to think I was one of the 6%, but I don't know.
Where does a lot of your pesticides and so forth come from? The people
It probably, especially if they're testing positive in an urban environment, it has to come from the food that they're eating.
Well, in the urban environment, and I worked in Florida for a number of years, you can take the soils immediately around Orlando, Tallahassee, Miami, and it comes from fertilizers used for lawns.
Oh, interesting. It's from the lawns.
Golf courses are terrible.
No wonder 94% will test positive then. I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, we did, as a soil science, we did, test it, especially around, because I worked around Tallahassee, and around the golf courses, and it was, overuse of fertilizers in urban environments is outrageous.
Interesting.
Farmers usually keep the rule, but the homeowner, they don't even know the rules. Just put it out there. Highest toxic farm chemicals are certainly, that's what.
Wow.
One of the reasons that, you have to be careful about, you know.
What we're
you need to
teaching.
educate the urban lawn, you know, because they can run down to the Ace Hardware or something, buy a bag of fertilizer and put it on.
Dump it all over.
And, well, in Florida, of course, they're sandy soils, and they don't hold fertilizer. It goes immediately, you know, into the aquifer.
Yeah.
You know, some places, here in Utah, we have soils that will hold, you know, retain a lot of fertilizer. So it's not as bad here. But that's one of the things that I think we need to educate people is, because there are no restrictions on how much fertilizer people put on their urban environment.
Right. I wonder,
My next door neighbor, she cleaned up the pond, she said, well, if you leave your leaves, it counts as one fertilization. She just rolled her eyes.
if you leave your leaves?
Yeah. she
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah, and I suppose pesticides too. I think this 94% was pesticide breakdown, but I'm sure that those are being used on gardens and lawns and things too. I want to say it out into the microphone so the people online, if there are, can hear that. Important comment was made that a lot of, in urban environments, a lot of the herbicides and pesticides that are contaminating is coming from homeowners putting lots of fertilizer on their lawn and things like that, and then that leaching into the soil. So we can't forget about that as a route as well. That's good.
Well, where do most people live?
Most of the population lives in an urban environment.
Urban environment. And that's not to say we don't have problems in agriculture.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. So it's also, as far as these studies, that being exposed to pesticides before birth leads to a lower IQ. That's a little bit scary. Several pesticides are linked to ADHD in kids, which seems to be more and more, and in adults linked to cancers and Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's, and in fact the risk of Alzheimer's, which the rate of Alzheimer's is going up ridiculously. The risk of Alzheimer's can go up between 1.5 to 4 times with pesticide exposure. So when we think about produce, who here's heard of the Dirty Dozen from the Environmental Working Group? A few? Strawberries. So I have to admit, I've always been a penny pincher. And it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, my wife's like, hey, Vaughn, we should probably, but I've also been into health all this time and trying to eat healthy. She said, I think we should start buying organic food. She makes the list, she writes down the meals and makes all the lists, and she sends me out to do the shopping on early Saturday morning because I'm an early bird. And I don't mind doing shopping for groceries. And she said, I think we got to start buying organic produce. And I said, Tammy, have you seen what that costs? Like, it's twice as much. I don't think we should. And she actually went and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with the Dirty Dozen produce. The Environmental Working Group every year puts out a list of the 12 most contaminated items of produce. And so that was our middle ground was, all right then, I'll buy the organic produce that's from the Dirty Dozen. And we started there. And I'm glad she got me going there because now we buy almost entirely organic produce. I'm curious, let's do a little poll if you're willing. So who here eats like vast majority organic food? Maybe 75% plus. If you grow it yourself, that totally counts. Right.
Yeah, my chickens, my ducks, my garden.
You're what?
My chickens, my ducks, my garden.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I started caring when I had kids.
Ah.
It became more important for building these little units and do your statistics like this.
Yeah.
Work on it, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, it is twice the price, but, you know, I mean, they can still plant the raspberries and they're gone in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
The tiny system it was.
Right.
So, chance, to me, it was kind of
Totally worth it. I agree. Comment was that when she had kids is when she really got interested in organic produce because they're small humans and they can't handle doses. We all shouldn't be dosing ourselves with pesticides, but yeah, they're small and it maybe affects them even more. Okay, so we got 75% and up. Let's say 50% and up. Who else falls in that category? I guess we cut some of the 75%ers. How about 25% or less organic produce? There, that was me 5 years ago, back here. How about 0? Don't mess with that stuff. That's fine.
I don't even know what organic is. So I guess I couldn't even answer that. I was in the Denver airport and you can buy organic water.
What? You can?
Labeled organic water. I don't even know what that is.
Does it have this, like, the certified seal and everything? Wow, organic water.
I guess that's what I'm trying to do, is to kind of understand what is organic, what defines it as organic. Maybe I could be eating organic and not even know.
Yeah, maybe.
Nowadays, everything says organic. So what is organic and what isn't organic?
Yeah, so here we go. William he showed up early and he was saying, I saw you labeled your thing food fight, which Natural Grocers made this presentation, not me, but he's like, so you know about the fight, right? The labeling and the corporate involvement, and he knows about 100 times more about that than I do, but there are very specific standards for what to be labeled organic. There's a USDA organic thing with a logo, and to have that, there's very specific requirements about what pesticides can be used, what herbicides can be used, what fertilizers can be used, modes of pest control. We'll get into that a little bit, but we don't get deep into like the specifics of it. But to say, and the FDA has specific, like to say 100% organic, and like if it's a combination thing, like it's crackers or whatever, it has to have a certain percentage of its raw materials or its ingredients be organic. You can say there's other little ways they can be labeled, but that term organic is pretty carefully regulated, and it's about a lot of those things. We'll touch on these briefly, some of them briefly, but I'm sure you can look them up and see what the specifics are. And the farms are audited. I think the FDA comes in and checks them out. I know this a little bit because my dad was telling me about how a lot of the people that I grew up around that are still farming up in Washington State, they have to be so careful about how their operation is run and even how their neighbors' operations are run, and like can their neighbors' trucks drive onto their land, all this stuff. Keeping all that stuff away, or else they run the risk of failing one of their audits and then they can't label their stuff as organic. So the organic water, I certainly can't explain that, but it's crazy. But yeah, there are very specific requirements for that term. There are other terms that are looser, like natural or whatever, but that one I think is pretty carefully regulated. So anyway, I got going eating buying organic for the Dirty Dozen. And there's also a Clean 15, by the way, which is like the 15 items of produce that are the least contaminated, and those are things like avocados and watermelons and pineapples and certain things like that. But the Environmental Working Group publishes that too. So that was step 2 for us. Step 1 was buy organic for the Dirty Dozen. Step 2 was, well, buy organic except for the Clean 15. And now I just can't be bothered. I just mostly buy organic, and once in a while I'll grab some from the Clean 15 that's not organic. So we're not 100%, but we're fairly close. So I don't know about you, but I can taste a difference in organic produce, particularly in some of the more contaminated ones, the ones that are on the Dirty Dozen. Like even before I got even interested in this, 15 years ago, I would eat grapes and they tasted kind of like chemicals. And I'd go run them under the faucet again and be like, these are gross. And I'd eat it again, it still tastes like chemicals. I think it probably was because of the residues that were in those grapes. Grapes are always on the Dirty Dozen. They soak stuff up really well. Strawberries are the same. If you taste an organic strawberry, you'll probably be able to tell a difference side by side. And I think actually, grow your own, that's the very best.
But
Eat it out of your garden.
I'd say, well, my kids laugh as my wife and I, they say, we have food storage, beyond what's reasonable.
Do you?
But it all comes out of our garden. We have peach trees, we have strawberries, raspberries, grow our own.
That is so awesome. That's
It's really to do it on a small scale.
Yeah,
And that's a lot.
that's the way to do it, is to grow your own. You're completely right.
You know exactly what's put on them.
Yep. Even organic produce that has to get shipped across the country and picked while when it's not ripe, and it's breaking down the whole time, it's not as nutritious. That is absolutely the way to do it.
Well, when we lived in Florida, when I went up to a tomato farm and watched them pick tomatoes, and I'm going, holy smoke. One of those things don't taste, have any taste to them.
They don't.
Great.
Yeah.
You know, the problem needs to be educated in that garden, because we have one, everybody has one.
Yeah.
And there's a cook out of England, I forget his name, he came on to do a lecture in America and said, congratulations, you are the first generation whose kids were not out. You're the first generation whose kids were not out in the field, like they're going to live, they're going to have a city.
Yeah, that's scary.
Because of the food. We're trained, we don't make our own soups, we don't make our own noodles, we don't make anything anymore.
We turn that over to other people, and that's harming our health. Yeah, I agree. So there are effects on the economy as well. This is cool actually, because I'm a big believer in growing your own food. Something that I need to get back to. I did when I was a kid on the family farm. I lived in Flagstaff until last August, and it's impossible to grow stuff. We grew some corn once, and the ears were like that long. Growing season is short, and it's just terrible soil. I didn't and still don't know that much about rebuilding the soil there, and so we could grow a few things. Zucchini would grow okay, but we struggled with gardening up in Flagstaff. But it should be a little easier in St. George, where I live now. So in terms of the economy, I mentioned this before, the higher concentration of industrial farms, it tends to depress the economy and the well-being of the farmers. I know when I was growing up in Washington in the 80s, there was the get big or get out kind of idea that you had to buy up more land and get really big and have the economies of scale to survive as a farmer. And there wasn't a lot of money then, still isn't, I don't think, unless the operations got really big. And so family farms were kind of getting lost. Even mid-sized farms were going away, getting bought up and sort of consolidated. Which affected a lot of the families that kids I went to school with and their families and things like that.
I have a question online. It's what marketplace trends is natural grocers seeing from different consumer bases? What differences are being seen between older generations, millennials, and Gen Z? And does natural grocers seek local?
Oh, great questions. I wish I knew more about the marketing trends. I know overall, generally, there's continual adoption of organic produce, with more and more people buying it and seeking it, which has led to some of the big box stores wanting to get into it, and I'll mention that a little bit later. But I would love to know the specifics of the different generations. I could make a guess, but I don't even know if that guess would be right. My guess is that the younger generations are adopting it more and more and more. But I don't know if and I imagine Natural Grocers does collect that kind of data. I don't know it. Thanks for bringing that question up. So in general, if we're harming the economy, we're losing the family farms. I want to make sure I get onto the right slide. This is kind of the bottom line. Environmental health equals economic health. Without a healthy environment, there can't be a thriving economy. And if we're destroying the environment, that leads to all these bad things: poverty, famine, poor health, conflict, which we're actually seeing some of that, which scares me. The good news, though, is that there is an alternative to it. Organic agriculture is part of the solution. I certainly wouldn't be so incorrect and bold to say that it was the whole solution, but it can be part of the solution because it does promote healthy soil, promote healthier ecosystems and healthy people. And it relies on more ecological processes. Organic farming has been shown to improve biodiversity, and that's microbes in the soil It's insects, it's birds, it's everything. It's all the types of biology that inhabits natural systems. And it's cycles adapted to local conditions. So here are some of the principles, and I'm sure there are people much more knowledgeable and educated than me to talk about how it's done exactly. But what we teach our customers is that it involves crop rotation, green manures and compost, biological pest control, mechanical cultivation. I experienced the biological pest control a little bit a couple summers ago when I went back home. We have some neighbors who are orchardists, and they grow apricots, and they've gone organic almost entirely. They're one of the bigger orchard operations around us, and they're good friends, so they let us come over after they've harvested and glean. And you know, with their big orchards, we can fill up boxes and boxes full of awesome apricots and eat till we're full up on them, even can them. But now, if you're picking apricots in their apricot orchard, you got to be not afraid of spiders, because there are a lot of spiders. And I'm not afraid of spiders, but some of my sisters are, and when we go pick their apricots, they're like, no, I'm not even going in that tree, because it's full of spider webs and spiders. And that's one of the methods that's used to keep down the pests, instead of spraying those apricots, which would make it so they can't be organic, and then we'd eat them, because I think apricots are on the dirty dozen. They use a lot of spiders. And I think that's kind of cool. That's more how Mother Nature would do it. And I don't mind getting a spider on my hand when I'm picking apricots now and then. But they're actually kind of proud of their spiders. And their trees look a little uglier because they're full of spider webs, but they still produce a lot of good apricots. You mean like import from another country, or like bring them in? I think they might have bought them, but I don't know for sure. Maybe. William says probably just happened naturally. Yeah, there's plenty of bugs out there, so plenty of spiders. But yeah, so it's more about using natural methods. Using legumes to fix nitrogen. Natural predators like those spiders, or even like birds, are encouraged to come get rid of the pests. And then natural materials like potassium bicarbonate and mulches to control weeds. And also, if people are confused about, well, can it be GMO, genetically modified, and organic? The answer is no. If you're buying something that's organic, it's also non-GMO. So that's what a lot of consumers that shop at natural grocers are looking for. So ultimately, eating and growing organic food is better for people. How are we doing on time? Not too bad. Better for the environment, better for the planet. And here's just a couple studies that sort of support that even more. In terms of biodiversity, birds, insects, pollinators, plants, all of it counts as biodiversity. And here's some graphs that are kind of interesting. So the white bars are the organic data points, and the black bars are the conventional data points. And it's birds per 10 hectares? Is that what HA is? Hectares. I pronounced it wrong, yeah. And so obviously the bird count is much higher in the organic farms, and the overall species, whether it's granivore, insectivore, omnivore, higher in the organic farms. So kind of across the board, a lot more biodiversity where there are organic farming is practiced. Here's another one. This is about carbon content in the soil. This is a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is where somebody looks at a whole bunch of other individual studies and sort of piles them all together and uses some fancy statistics to pile all that data together and make it useful as a big pile of data together. And it's comparing the carbon content from organic operations to conventional, and showing that the organic content of the soil is much higher in the organic operations and a lot higher in microbial richness. which is super important too. There have been lots of discussions about soil fungi playing a key role. That's part of the biodiversity that most people don't think of. My eyes have been opened and my mind has been blown a little bit by how important this fungus is down in the ground from several different talks. And most people don't understand how that works. I'm still totally learning more and more every day about how that works. It's partly why I'm here. And how the plants and the fungi interact with each other, and the plants bring carbohydrates down in the soil that the fungi can use. The fungi are bringing in minerals. They stabilize the soil for water. It's this really cool symbiotic relationship. And the key is that we want our customers to understand, even if they don't deeply understand that relationship, is that organic farming strengthens that and helps not disturb it like conventional farming naturally would. And eating organic food is good for their health and our health too. I thought this was really interesting. They did a study where some adults shifted from the normal diet they were eating to just 80% organic food. And and they tested their urine before and after. After 1 week of 80% organic food, the pesticide breakdown products in the urine went down 96% in a week. And so, we're scared about the fact that toxins can accumulate, but in this case, there was a 96% drop of pesticide breakdown products in their urine after a week. So that's actually kind of hopeful. You make the switch to eating organic, quit eating the dirty dozen or whatever, or even better, and these people were 80%, the breakdown products in the urine went down a ton in a week. It's also been shown that organic food is more nutritious. Have you heard the term phytochemicals? Yeah, when we talk to our consumers about nutrition, we've got the vitamins and the minerals, and then there's this broad classification of phytochemicals, plant nutrition. There are thousands of them, bioflavonoids and all kinds of different things that our bodies need that come from plants when we eat plants. And it's been proven that the phytochemical content in organic produce is higher. And one of the reasons for that, I don't know if this is a theory or if it's a fact, but I think it's a fact. The plants make phytochemicals to protect themselves from pests or other stressors. And so when a plant is, it doesn't have to worry about pests as much. It doesn't have to produce as many defenses. And so therefore it's lower in its phytochemicals. And so organic plants have to work a little bit harder to survive because they're not being sprayed and fertilized quite as much. And so they're higher in nutrition, which is really interesting. And so some of those phytochemicals are really important nutrients. Vitamin E, vitamin C, polyphenols. And that's been researched fairly carefully. Cruciferous vegetables. Who can name a cruciferous vegetable? Broccoli, right. Cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, some of those. They have sulfur in them, right? And that's part of why they're so good for us. They have these unique sulfur-containing compounds, and those sulfur-containing compounds are higher in organic produce than they are in conventional produce. Tomatoes, organic tomatoes are 20% higher in lycopene, 30% higher in vitamin C. If you pick them out of your garden, they're probably even better than that. They sure taste like it. We can taste nutrition. That's also something that has been shown is people can taste nutrition. Yes?
One thing I'm going to play with this summer maybe is dry farming. They say that the produce of dry farming actually has even more nutrition.
So they're stressed by having less water available. Is that the idea?
I don't know, maybe they'll play with it.
Play with it, yeah. You got to have enough for them to grow, but yeah, interesting. That's good. For the people online, lady in the audience who's going to play with dry farming, which probably provides less water to the vegetables, and then they're more nutritious. So it's also shown that pesticide levels are average 400 times lower in organic produce. So that's a pretty big delta. We talked about how organic produce tastes better. It's actually been studied, proven by research with apples and strawberries. They did it at Colorado State. And the consumers reported they preferred the taste of organic strawberries over conventional. And boy, I noticed that. I think any of us would notice that. They really do taste different. So we've been mostly talking about fruits and vegetables, but it also really applies to animal produce as well, animal products. Animal produce, is that even a thing? Animal products. And their animal products that are produced either organically or naturally are also higher in certain nutrients. You've heard of omega-3 fatty acids that most people think of in salmon. Well, beef has omega-3 too, higher in pasture-raised animals. So it's a ratio between omega-3 to omega-6, higher in organic and naturally raised meat. More conjugated linoleic acid, which we find in butter, for example, is a very health-supportive fat, higher in organic and naturally raised animals. More vitamins, even antioxidants. People think of antioxidants in tomatoes and produce, which is where there are tons. There's even antioxidants in naturally raised meat. So the nutrition in the meat and the dairy products and eggs is better for organically raised animals. It's better for the economy. There are organic hotspots. My neighbors, the apricot growers, are probably experiencing this in these studies where they compare high density conventional versus higher density organic. They've found that the median household income is higher in the organic hotspots, less poverty. So the median household income averages about $2,000 higher per household, and the poverty rate drops by about 1.35%, according to this study. And as far as yields can be lower, 10%-ish, but prices are higher, 20 to 50% higher. So there's a trade-off there that can be helpful economically. And Natural Grocers takes a pretty strong stand here. We only carry 100% organic produce, naturally raised meats. A lot of stores will carry kind of both for people to choose from, and fortunately that's the store I was shopping at when my wife convinced me to go with the Dirty Dozen. Buy those organic because I could still buy the other ones that were not. But at Natural Grocers, we only carry organic. We want to support that in terms of people's health and the economy and the environment. Only carry organic. Only naturally raised meats. There is some concern that as this demand goes up among the general population, that the big box stores are going to get into it, and they are getting into it, and that there will be greenwashing and diluting of standards. So we really try to support high-level standards and keeping them high so that all the benefits that we've been talking about, when a consumer buys it, they're actually getting it, and it doesn't get diluted down to where it isn't valuable anymore.
Just a curiosity, when you say organic farmers, large commercial farms, do they qualify as organic farms?
If they pass those requirements and are using those, then in these studies, I imagine that they do. It could be a larger, yeah.
Potatoes, I know an organic farmer who has several 100,000 acres.
Yeah, I'm sure that's counted in this group. Yeah, we want to think of them as the small family farms as the organic farmer, but there are some big organic farms, right?
So that's one of the things
Yeah. It's not as,
they both farm organically and conventionally.
oh, like the big farm will do some that's organic and some that isn't. That makes sense. Yeah. So it's not necessarily the case that organic means small family farm. Yeah, good point. So sometimes, let's see, I think I might need to, sometimes people will say, well, can we actually support the needs of the growing world population with organic farming? Maybe we actually need some conventional farming, and we can't support the world with organics. But these are interesting facts. We already, and I don't know who figured this out, but we already produce enough food to feed 10 billion people, and then we waste a lot of it. Waste 40% of our food in the U.S. And I believe that. So food waste is something I can't stand. Like my kids probably are sick and tired of me making them clean up their plate and eat the leftovers and stuff. But that's a real problem. We waste a lot of the food that we grow. And so if we weren't, the question of can we actually feed the world with organic produce, then I think the answer is probably yes. So this is kind of the summary. This is the last slide. There's lots of reasons to eat and grow organic produce. It's more nutrient dense. You're not getting the pesticides nearly as much. The methods that are used are regenerative for the planet, for the soil, less destructive or degenerative, and more profitable for farmers. So that's what I have. Are there any other questions that I could answer? No, well, I appreciate all the comments that have been made. I've definitely learned some things as well. And thanks for coming today and being part of this presentation.
So we've got about 15 minutes till the general session. So if you just want to make your way to that, you try to maybe where we started yesterday. Or maybe nervous with the camera.
I'm so sorry. No, it's okay. At least I didn't come in here and turn on